First contact gone wrong, Captain Sarah. Chen was reviewing the navigation charts when the proximity alarms started blaring throughout the colony ship New Horizons. The massive vessel, carrying 50,000 sleeping colonists toward their new home in the Kepler 442 system, had been traveling through empty space for 3 years without encountering so much as a space rock larger than a football. Captain, to the bridge came the voice of Commander Jake Morrison, her first officer. Something in his tone made Sarah move faster than usual through the corridors of the ship. The bridge of the New Horizons was a study in practical design, built for long-term space travel rather than military engagement. When Sarah arrived, she found her crew staring at the main view screen with expressions ranging from confusion to barely contained amusement. "Status report," Sarah said, settling into her captain's chair while trying to process what she was seeing. Before them hung the most elaborate display of military might anyone had ever witnessed. 250 vessels arranged in perfect geometric formations, each ship gleaming with polished metal and decorated with what could only be described as artistic flourishes. Massive banners fluttered in the vacuum of space, somehow maintaining their dramatic pose despite the laws of physics. "We dropped out of hyperspace for our scheduled maintenance check," Commander Morrison explained, "and found them waiting for us. They've been broadcasting what they call surrender demands for the past 15 minutes. Dr. Lisa Park, the ship's chief science officer and xenobiologist, looked up from her console with a puzzled expression. "Captain, their transmission methods are unusual. They're using 17 different communication frequencies simultaneously, and the message is accompanied by what appears to be a full orchestra." "An orchestra?" Sarah asked. "Complete with a choir," Park confirmed. "The musical arrangement is actually quite sophisticated, though extremely dramatic. They keep playing what sounds like a funeral march while demanding our immediate capitulation to something called the Eternal Zephyrian Empire." Sarah studied the alien fleet more carefully. The ships were undeniably impressive, but something about them struck her as odd. They were too perfect, too polished, too obviously designed for show rather than function. "Analysis of their vessels?" she asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Morrison replied. "Their ships are enormous, but our scans show they're mostly hollow space. The weapon systems appear to be primarily energy-based, but the power signatures are inefficient. It's like they're designed to look impressive rather than actually be effective." Before Sarah could respond, the view screen filled with swirling mist and dramatic lighting effects. Through the theatrical haze, a figure materialized that looked like it had stepped out of a fantasy novel. The being was tall and imposing, wearing elaborate robes that seemed to shift colors in the light. Its face was hidden behind a mask that resembled a stylized sun, and its voice carried the resonance of someone speaking through a very expensive sound system. "Insignificant creatures of the void," the figure intoned, "I am Emperor Zixtalar, supreme ruler of the eternal Zephyrian Empire, master of 1,000 worlds, and bringer of inevitable doom. Your pathetic vessel has violated the sacred boundaries of our domain." Sarah stood up, straightening her uniform. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the human colony ship New Horizons. We weren't aware this system was claimed territory. We're on a peaceful colonization mission." Emperor Zixthola raised what appeared to be a scepter topped with a glowing orb. "Peace is irrelevant to those who face the might of the Zephyrian Empire. You will surrender immediately and prepare for absorption into our glorious civilization, or face the consequences of our stellar annihilation protocol." Commander Morrison leaned toward Sarah. "Did he just say stellar annihilation protocol?" "I think he did," Sarah replied quietly. She turned back to the view screen. Emperor, could you explain what this protocol involves? There was a pause. The dramatic mist continued to swirl around the Emperor's figure. It involves the complete annihilation of stars, he said, as if this should be obvious. Right, Sarah said, glancing at her crew. And how exactly does one annihilate a star? Through the deployment of our cosmic devastation devices, which harness the fundamental forces of entropy and chaos to unmake the very essence of stellar bodies. Dr. Park had been running continuous scans during the conversation. She looked up with barely concealed amusement. Captain, those cosmic devastation devices appear to be standard plasma cannons, about 50 years behind our current technology. They couldn't scratch our hull shielding. Lieutenant Commander Tom Walsh, the ship's engineer, tried to hide a smile. Should I mention that their formation, while visually impressive, leaves them completely vulnerable to crossfire from their own ships? Sarah held up a hand for silence, though she was beginning to understand why her crew seemed more entertained than frightened. Emperor Zixtalar, we're impressed by your fleet's presentation. The coordination required for such an elaborate display must take considerable skill and practice. This seemed to catch the Emperor off guard. You are impressed by our instruments of terror and destruction. Absolutely, Sarah said. The artistic elements alone are remarkable. Those banners, for instance. How do you maintain their position in vacuum? They are the banners of eternal dread, designed to strike fear into the hearts of all who behold them. The Emperor replied, though his voice carried less certainty than before. The engineering must be fascinating, Dr. Park added. What kind of field generators do you use to create the fluttering effect? The Emperor's masked face tilted slightly. They flutter because they are touched by the winds of destiny. Fascinating, Sarah said. We'd love to learn more about your technology. Would you be willing to share some technical specifications? Another pause. You wish to understand our technology of doom? Well, yes. Understanding different approaches to engineering is part of our mission. For instance, those ships in your outer formation appear to be using a propulsion system we haven't encountered before. They are powered by the engines of infinite despair, Emperor Zixtalar declared. Infinite despair engines, Commander Morrison repeated. That's creative naming. Dr. Park was studying her scans more intently. Captain, I'm detecting some unusual readings from their flagship. The energy signatures suggest they're using a tremendous amount of power for what appears to be environmental effects. Environmental effects? Sarah asked. The mist, the lighting, the sound system. They're running enough power to light a small city just to maintain the dramatic atmosphere. Sarah was beginning to piece together a picture that was both fascinating and slightly sad. Emperor, when you say you're the master of 1,000 worlds, how exactly did you achieve that mastery? Through the deployment of our terrible fleets and the implementation of our protocols of inevitable surrender, the Emperor said proudly, and these protocols work every time. No species has ever resisted the might of the Zephyrian Empire. All who behold our vessels immediately recognize their fate and submit to our authority. Commander Morrison was studying the tactical display. Captain, I'm detecting some unusual movement patterns in their fleet. They're maintaining perfect ceremonial positions, but it's actually making them sitting ducks for any real military engagement. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Emperor Zixtalar, I have to be honest with you. We're not actually terrified of your fleet. The mist effects flickered momentarily. You are not terrified. No, we're impressed by the craftsmanship. and the obvious effort that went into the presentation, but we're not afraid. Your ships are quite beautiful, actually. Beautiful. The Emperor's voice cracked slightly. They are instruments of terror and cosmic destruction. They're definitely impressive, Sarah agreed. But terror might be overstating it. We're more curious than anything else. Lieutenant? Commander Walsh reported quietly. Captain, I'm monitoring their fleet communications. They seem to be having some kind of emergency consultation. They keep using a phrase that our translator renders, as this wasn't supposed to happen. Sarah decided to push further. Emperor, would it be possible to arrange a meeting? We'd love to learn more about Zephyrian culture, and perhaps share some information about human civilization. The transmission quality fluctuated as Emperor Zixtalar apparently consulted with his advisors. When he returned, his voice had lost some of its dramatic flair. This is unprecedented. The eternal Zephyrian Empire does not negotiate with inferior species. We understand if you need time to consider it, Sarah said diplomatically. First contact situations can be complicated for everyone involved. We do not need time, the Emperor declared, his theatrical tone returning. The Empire makes swift decisions. We will deploy our advanced intimidation protocols. The Zephyrian fleet began moving into an even more elaborate formation. Ships that had been arranged in geometric patterns started shifting into what appeared to be a massive three-dimensional mandala. Additional vessels emerged from behind the larger ships, each one more ornately decorated than the last. Captain, Dr. Park said, they're expending enormous amounts of energy on these maneuvers. It's actually quite beautiful from an artistic perspective, though completely impractical for any real military purpose. Their new formation is even more vulnerable than the first one, Morrison observed. They're basically creating a shooting gallery. Sarah realized she was witnessing something remarkable. The Zephyrian Empire appeared to be an entire civilization built around the concept of intimidation. But they had never actually encountered anyone who wasn't immediately frightened by their displays. The Emperor's transmission returned with even more elaborate special effects. Behold, the true might of the eternal Zephyrian Empire. We now deploy the formation of infinite despair. It's certainly impressive, Sarah said. The coordination required for such a complex maneuver must take years of practice. It does, the Emperor replied, sounding pleased despite himself. Our fleet commanders spend decades perfecting the art of proper intimidation displays. We'd love to hear more about your training methods, Sarah said. Human military historians would find them fascinating. There was another long pause. When Emperor Zixtalar returned, his tone had shifted noticeably. You would study our methods. For historical purposes, absolutely. The development of different military traditions across species is an important field of research. Dr. Park was monitoring the fleet communications again. Captain, they're discussing something called Protocol Omega. Apparently, they've never encountered a species that wanted to study their intimidation techniques rather than surrender to them. Sarah made what would later be remembered as one of the most important decisions in galactic history. Emperor Zixtalar, what would you say to a formal cultural exchange? We could arrange for representatives from both our civilizations to meet and share knowledge. The transmission quality improved as the elaborate special effects diminished. A formal cultural exchange, the Emperor repeated, genuine curiosity creeping into his voice. Yes, we're always eager to learn about new civilizations, and it seems like the Zephyrian Empire has developed some unique approaches to governance and military organization. For the first time since the conversation began, Emperor Zixtalar seemed at a loss for words. The eternal Zephyrian Empire does not typically engage in academic pursuits with other species. Well, Sarah said gently, there's always a first time for everything. The Zephyrian fleet held its elaborate formation for several minutes while the Emperor presumably consulted with his advisors. When the transmission resumed, the dramatic staging had been considerably reduced, and Sarah could see more clearly the being behind the mask. Captain Chen, Emperor Zixtalar said, "The Empire requires time to consider your proposal. This situation is unprecedented in our 3,000-year history." "Of course," Sarah nodded. "We'll remain in the system if you'd like to continue." "Discussions that would be acceptable," the Emperor replied. "Perhaps tomorrow we could discuss these academic exchanges in more detail." As the transmission ended, Sarah looked around her bridge. Her crew's expressions ranged from amazement to barely contained laughter. "Captain," Commander Morrison said, "I think we just accidentally prevented a war that was never going to happen anyway." Dr. Pock was already compiling her observations. "The sociological implications are staggering. An entire interstellar empire built around intimidation tactics that have never been seriously tested." Sarah settled back into her captain's chair, watching the Zephyrian fleet maintain its ornate formation. "Well, team, it looks like we're about to become galactic anthropologists." Little did any of them know that their peaceful first contact would soon expose one of the galaxy's greatest military secrets and transform the political landscape of their entire sector of space. The laughter that shook an empire. Lisa Park had expected many things when she signed up for humanity's first deep space colonization mission. But sitting in the ornate conference room of an alien flagship while trying not to laugh at the most elaborate interior design she'd ever seen was not one of them. The meeting room aboard Emperor Zixtalar's flagship looked like someone had taken a medieval castle's throne room and decided it needed more crystals, more golden fixtures, and definitely more dramatic lighting. Every surface was covered in intricate carvings depicting scenes of conquest and submission. Though Park noticed that none of the carvings actually showed any combat, just aliens bowing to Zephyrian forces. "Dr. Park," said General Voctor, the Empire's military commander, "we must confess that your species presents certain analytical challenges." General Voctor was an impressive figure, even without his elaborate armor. His species appeared to be naturally tall and graceful, with iridescent skin that shifted colors based on their emotional state. Right now, his skin was displaying what Park had learned were confusion patterns. "How so, General?" Park asked, trying to focus on the cultural exchange rather than the fact that the conference table appeared to be carved from a single massive crystal. "You display none of the expected behavioral patterns when confronted with Zephyrian authority displays," General Voctor explained. "Our xenological databases contain detailed profiles of over 2,000 species, and all demonstrated immediate recognition of Zephyrian superiority." Emperor Zixtalar, who had removed his ornate mask for the meeting, gestured toward a wall covered in what appeared to be ceremonial weapons. "These are the artifacts of eternal victory, Dr. Park. Each represents a species that has submitted to our rule." Park studied the display with genuine scientific interest. "This is fascinating. How long has the Empire been expanding?" "Over 3,000 years, the Emperor replied with evident pride. "Our methods have proven effective across the galaxy. And in all that time, you've never encountered a species that didn't immediately surrender." General Voctor's skin shifted to a deeper shade of confusion. "There have been ... anomalies. The crystalline collective required multiple intimidation displays before surrendering." The Void Wanderers actually retreated from our space entirely. What did you make of their retreat? Park asked. Obviously, they fled in terror at the sight of our magnificent fleets, Emperor Zixtalar said, though his voice carried less certainty than it had the day before. Park pulled out her tablet and began taking notes. Would it be possible to review some of these historical encounters? For research purposes, of course. The Emperor and General exchanged glances. The historical archives are restricted, General Voctor said slowly. They contain strategic information. That could compromise our operational security. I understand, Park said. But from an anthropological perspective, understanding how different species react to first contact could provide valuable insights for everyone involved. Meanwhile, aboard the New Horizons, Captain Sarah Chen was having her own revelations. Commander Morrison had been analyzing the Zephyrian fleet's tactical capabilities, and his findings were remarkable. Captain, Morrison said, I've completed a full analysis of their military hardware. The results are, well, they're unprecedented. How so? Their weapons systems are functional, but they're designed for maximum visual impact rather than actual combat effectiveness. Those plasma cannons we detected, they're powerful enough to put on a good light show, but they wouldn't penetrate our standard deflector shields. Sarah leaned back in her chair. And their tactical formations, every single formation they've shown us is optimized for intimidation rather than combat. They're beautiful to look at, but they leave massive gaps. In their defensive coverage, a single ship with modern weapons could probably take on their entire fleet. You're suggesting that the mighty Zephyrian Empire has never actually fought a real war. I'm suggesting that they've never needed to, Morrison replied. Think about it, Captain. If every species they've encountered has surrendered immediately, they've never had to test their military capabilities in actual combat. Back aboard the Zephyrian flagship, Dr. Park was making similar discoveries. General Voctor had agreed to show her some of the historical records, though he insisted on maintaining strict security protocols. This is the record of our encounter. With the Melodic Consortium, General Voctor said, activating a holographic display. They surrendered after witnessing our standard intimidation protocol. Park studied the data. What exactly did they say when they surrendered? They transmitted a message saying, General Voctor paused, checking his records. They said, "We are honored by your artistic presentation and would be delighted to learn more about your cultural traditions." They thought it was art. Obviously, they were overwhelmed by the terrifying implications of our display, Emperor said, though his conviction seemed to be wavering. "Let me see another example," Park said. The general brought up another record, the Harmony Collective. They retreated immediately after our first contact. Park read their departure message. It says here, "We thank you for the beautiful performance, but we must continue our journey to preserve the cosmic balance. May your artistic endeavors bring joy to many species." They also thought it was a performance, Park observed. Emperor Zixtalar was quiet for a long moment. They were clearly using coded language to hide their fear, he said finally, though he sounded less certain than before. "What about this one?" Park asked, pointing to another record. "The Iron Collective. It says they actually engaged in combat." "Yes," General Voctor said grimly. "They resisted for several months before finally surrendering. It was our most difficult conquest." Park studied the combat records carefully. "General, looking at these engagement patterns, it appears that the Iron Collective was trying to match your formations rather than actually fight you." "What do you mean?" "Look at their ship movements. They're mirroring your maneuvers, maintaining the same geometric patterns." It's like they were trying to participate in what they thought was some kind of ceremonial dance. General Voctor's skin had shifted to a deep purple, which Park had learned indicated extreme confusion. A ceremonial dance. Their final surrender. Message confirms it, Park said, reading from the records. They wrote, "We acknowledge your superior choreographic skills and yield the performance space to your clearly more experienced troupe. We hope to learn your techniques for future cultural celebrations." The conference room fell silent. Emperor Zixtalar stared at the historical records with growing dismay. "Dr. Park," he said slowly, "are you suggesting that the Eternals' empire has spent 3,000 years intimidating species that were never actually intimidated? I'm suggesting that you've encountered a galaxy full of peaceful species who interpreted your dramatic displays as cultural expressions rather than military threats," Park replied gently. At that moment, Captain Chun's voice came through the communication system. "Dr. Park, could you and our hosts join us for an urgent conference? We've discovered something important." The group transported to the New Horizons, where they found the human crew assembled in the main conference room. Commander Morrison had prepared a comprehensive analysis of the galactic political situation. "Emperor General," Sarah began, "we've been analyzing the current state of galactic civilization, and we've discovered something that might interest you." Morrison activated the holographic display, showing a map of their sector of the galaxy. "This is the current political landscape. Over the past 1,000 years, while the Zephyrian Empire has been expanding through intimidation, several other powers have been growing through actual military conquest." "Other powers?" Emperor Zixtalar asked. "The Kronos hegemony, the Stellar Federation, the Unity Collective. They've been fighting real wars, developing real military technologies, and building actual combat fleets." General Voctor studied the display with growing alarm. "How do our capabilities compare to these other powers?" Morrison exchanged glances with Captain Chen. "General, based on our analysis, the Zephyrian Empire's military capabilities are approximately 3 centuries behind the current galactic standard." "What does that mean?" the Emperor asked. "It means that any one of these other powers could conquer your empire in a matter of weeks," Sarah said gently. "Your intimidation tactics have been successful because you've been fortunate enough to encounter only peaceful species. The revelation hit the Zephyrian leaders like a physical blow." General Voctor's skin shifted through a rapid sequence of colors that Park recognized as indicating shock, fear, and confusion. "But we are the masters of 1,000 worlds," Emperor Zixtalar said weakly. "You're the beloved cultural ambassadors." "To 1,000 worlds," Dr. Park corrected. "They didn't surrender to you, Emperor. They welcomed you. They thought you were sharing your artistic traditions." "All this time," General Voctor said quietly, "we thought we were feared throughout the galaxy, but we were actually entertaining them." "The good news," Captain Chen said, "is that you've built something remarkable. 1,000 species that genuinely like and respect Zephyrian culture. That's not something you can achieve through fear. But what happens when we encounter one of these real military powers?" the Emperor asked. "That's where we might be able to help," Sarah said. "Humanity has experience with both diplomacy and warfare. We could help you develop actual defensive capabilities while maintaining your cultural influence." Morrison pulled up another display. "The key is that you don't need to become a military power to survive. You need to become a diplomatic power. With your cultural connections and humanity's military knowledge, we could create a defensive alliance. That would make everyone think twice about attacking either of our civilizations." Emperor Zixtalar looked around the room at both his own people and the humans. You would do this. After discovering our weakness. It's not weakness, Dr. Park said. It's a different kind of strength. You've created something that no military power has ever achieved. Genuine affection from 1,000 different species. That's incredibly valuable. Besides, Sarah added with a smile, your theatrical presentations really are quite impressive. We could learn a lot from your expertise in cultural diplomacy. For the first time since the conversation began, Emperor Zixtalar smiled. Perhaps we could teach you some of our intimidation techniques. And perhaps you could teach us some of yours, General Voctor added hopefully. Commander Morrison grinned. General, I think you're going to be very interested in human military doctrine. We've always believed that the best way to win a war is to make your enemy laugh so hard they forget to fight. We do have some experience with that, Sarah said, looking around the room. After all, we managed to turn the mighty Zephyrian Empire into our friends in less than 48 hours. The laughter that followed was heard throughout both ships, and it marked the beginning of what would become known as the Galactic Laughter Protocol, a new form of diplomacy that would reshape political relationships across the galaxy. As Dr. Park later wrote in her report, sometimes the greatest strength isn't in making others fear you, but in making them glad they met you. The Zephyrian Empire had been doing that for 3,000 years without even realizing it. The human colony ship and the Zephyrian fleet continued their journey together, bound for the Kepler 442 system, where they would establish the first joint human Zephyrian colony. It would become the model for a new kind of galactic civilization, one built on laughter, curiosity, and the revolutionary idea that making friends was far more effective than making enemies. And whenever other species asked how humanity had managed to ally with the legendary Zephyrian Empire, the answer was always the same. We didn't conquer them. We didn't intimidate them. We just refused to be scared of them, and it turned out that was exactly what they needed.